Hello, and welcome to From the EBPL Archives, Encore presentations from the East Brunswick Public Library. I am your host, Melissa Hosick. This event was graciously funded by the East Brunswick Friends of the Library. To learn more about the Friends or make a donation, visit ebpl.org/friends. Now, enjoy the program. Option Green, Climate Change and Community is presented by the East Brunswick Public Library and the Friends of the East Brunswick Environmental Commission. Funding is provided by the American Library Association's Resilient Communities, Libraries Respond to Climate Change, and the East Brunswick Friends of the Library. Thank you to all of the public libraries who are our community partners. For more information about Option Green, visit ebpl.org/Option Green. Good evening, everyone. I hope you are able to hear me. My name is Melissa Hosick, and I'm the Adult Programming Librarian at the East Brunswick Public Library. Thank you for coming out for our second lecture in the Option Green Climate Change and Community series. So just a few things. I have put a link in the comments for access to the captioning. For those who'll be watching it on replay later on YouTube in the next few days, we will have captioning on that video as well. So just a few things. There's pretty much it. So I'm going to introduce tonight's presenter. Tait Chirenje holds a PhD in trace metal biogeochemistry from the University of Florida, a Master of Science in Earth Science from the University of Gulf, and a BS from the University of Zimbabwe. Besides lots of many things that he does, we're talking tonight about how he teaches and engages students in the international sustainable development projects in Zimbabwe, Ecuador, and Brazil. Thank you, Dr. Chirenje.
Thank you, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. As Melissa mentioned, I'm a professor at Stockton University, and I've been there 17 years. I can't believe it's been 17 years already. I'm going to talk to you about some of the projects that I work on at Stockton, mostly in the program that I run on international sustainable development. And the outline of my talk, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just talking about the problem that got us to where we are working on these projects in Ecuador, Zimbabwe, Panama, Costa Rica. We have so many sites that we work in, although tonight's presentation is focused most on Zimbabwe. Sorry. I'm sorry. And then after that, I'm going to go and discuss some of the things that we did specifically in Zimbabwe, where we went on a listening tour to find out what was happening there. And then we established a base where we were based pretty much for everything that we did. And then some of the projects that we worked on through the years. So in the 17 years that I've been doing this, there's one thing that I've noticed, that it doesn't matter how specific or how small a project is, a specific project that you're working on, how tiny it is. It doesn't really matter. If you're going to make any headway in addressing it, you need to take a step back and figure out, okay, if it's an environmental problem, who else is affected? Who are the stakeholders? And who are the people who are involved? How does it affect people who actually make a living or benefit from this particular activity? And then it's the only way that you can actually address it in a way that is long-lasting or sustainable. So you have to, at least in our field, you have to pretty much incorporate the triple bottom line. You have to look at who is involved, the people, who is making money out of it, and are there people who actually make a living out of this project, this particular issue, and then how does it affect the environment? So with that in mind, you see that when it comes to climate change, for example, in Zimbabwe, we all know the usual suspects, right? Carbon dioxide emissions are getting higher and higher. Of course, there are other gases that are involved. Methane, nitrous oxide, sulfur hexafluoride, ozone, CFCs, and all these others. And we know the activities that are leading to the release of these gases: transportation, deforestation, land use changes, waste disposal. And the correlation, this correlation has been discussed many, many times, in the impact of anthropogenic emissions on changing temperature. Here's the problem, though, that we're seeing, that a lot of us right now who are watching this in a developed country. And if you look at the $80 trillion global economy, you look at the big players, the people who are driving it. They are the same people who also are emitting a lot of the emissions that are causing problems. I looked really hard on this earlier, and I only saw 2 African countries that actually made it to this chart, that were emitting enough to make it to this chart. Same deal, when you look at carbon dioxide emissions, it's the same pattern. The people who have the highest standards of living are the ones who are also emitting a lot. And this is not to blame anyone, but the issue is those who have a high standard of living are also going to be the ones who are more resilient to the impact of climate change. So when you look at, for example, when I moved from Zimbabwe to the United States, and I share this and talk to my friends about it. We laugh about this all the time because it's something that that is just, well, it's not a laughing matter, but when you look at just the impact of my moving from one small country, Zimbabwe, and moving to Canada and then moving to the United States, when I do this as a Zimbabwean, living in a small house with many people, when we go down there to do research, my impact would be about, it would tell me that my footprint is smaller, that if everyone lived like me, we would need about 1 planet to survive. But being here in the United States, and I have to admit, I'm one of those people who would travel more than the average person. And ironically, we are traveling to talk about sustainability, to do sustainability projects. But it's telling me that if everyone lived like me, we would need about 7.5 planets, which means that if we can't keep up this lifestyle, the lifestyle that I'm living is way over what the Earth's systems can support. The situation is a little different when you go to other countries. But in the United States, we can afford. Climate change is being felt here also, but we can afford, because when you look at these changes in sea level and the impacts that are happening with climate change, we can afford actually to bury our heads in the sand, because our systems are built in a resilient way. And that's not to discount, I know many people who are probably in this broadcast were also affected by Hurricane Sandy. But look at how fast, how quickly we recovered from that. And then compare to what happens in third world countries when a storm passes through town. Here, my girlfriend my then girlfriend, who is now my wife, used to live in Margate. And there will be a flood one weekend, and it will be like maybe close to knee deep in water due to a king tide. When you go back a week later, it's like nothing happened. If that happens in a lot of third world countries, it takes years to recover from those things. And it's just amazing when you look at, for example, in Zimbabwe, the projected changes that are going to happen due to climate change. When you look at projected temperature changes from the extreme end to the and the level that you see here at the bottom is if we make drastic changes to reduce emissions. And we know this is not happening. So the chances are it's going to be somewhere along this range here. Same thing with change in precipitation. If you just compare with what has happened in the last 20 or 30 years, and use that as the mean, as the base, and then look at what is the projected change. So the change that's going to happen, which will be a deviation from what you'd expect. You see that as far as temperatures are concerned, temperatures could go up as high as almost 5 degrees by the end of this century, and precipitation is going down. But this doesn't tell the whole story. Because if you look, for example, what's happening right now in New Jersey with snow, if you look at the snow totals for this winter, and you don't consider the fact that we got 3 back-to-back storms that dumped, for some of you, maybe 6 inches, then 8 inches and 20 inches over a period of 1 week. And if you are looking at an average at the end of the season, for example, and you see that New Jersey got maybe 28 inches or 30 inches of snow, if you don't consider that 2/3 of it maybe came over 1 weekend, then you don't have the whole story. And so some of these numbers don't tell that whole story, because what we've been noticing in Zimbabwe is that not only are the totals going down, but sometimes you get the whole season of rainfall within 2 weeks and then nothing. Or you get the rain has patterns and it has its own rhythms that people are adapting to during their, pretty much during their whole lives. They know we plant corn during the last weekend in October, and we're supposed to be harvesting sometime in April or in May, whenever they're going to be harvesting. And they know that there's this first rain that comes, it has a name, and there are rituals associated with this particular rain. And yet, over the last 40 years, these things have been changing so much that it just doesn't make sense. Even those rituals don't make sense anymore. So the changes are just really drastic. So numbers by themselves don't really tell the story unless you look at the pattern throughout the whole season. And if you look at the cost of some of the disasters that have happened over the last century and compared to what's happening, it's kind of scarier, to tell you the truth. Now, these photos that we're looking at are photos that's just from events in the last 3 weeks. There was a flood that went through Southern Africa, and every photo that you see on your screen right now is coming from what was experienced in either South Africa, Zimbabwe, or Mozambique. Many people that we have talked to who are in their 80s, 90s, even someone who was 104 years old. My grandmother is 104 years old. She saw a first flood this year, 2021. First flood in their neighborhood. There are a lot of other people in their 90s who have never experienced a flood in their whole life, and they're experiencing it now. And I'm going to come back to these photos later, but these photos are actually coming from our site. This is the project base that we use in Zimbabwe when I take students to go to Zimbabwe. And I want to point to this right now so you can just see that this is a basement. And this is a full 6 foot, it's actually about 6.8, a 6 foot 8 inch tall doorway that is flooded almost to the top. And this is a fish pond. These are mushroom sheds. And this area is all completely flooded. This kid is actually standing on what was generally considered high ground. And one thing that's happening that is kind of weird when you get these situations, I'm an immigrant here in the United States. I've been here for over 20 years now. And although I love living here, my first choice would have been to live in my own home country. That's where I grew up. That's where all my friends are. That's where my family is. And when you see people suddenly decide that I'm just going to live where I grew up, where my whole life has been attached, and I'm just up and leave and go somewhere else, usually it takes something drastic. Sometimes they are leaving and they are moving from areas that are affected and they're going into towns, or they are going into neighboring countries. But there's been a trend that is really interesting that has been happening recently. They are moving. If you remember the graphs that I showed you earlier, the countries that have the highest standards of living, that's where everyone is migrating. And wherever people are affected, actually, the other arrows, the other graphics that show arrows also coming from South America. They are going to the countries that are doing really well. And that's not a long-lasting solution. It's not a sustainable solution. Everyone is not going to be able to move into, and not everyone wants to move just up and live where they grew up and where they've been for the last 40, 60, 70, or even 20 years. There are a lot of other people who are younger who are not, they just don't want to leave. So how do we address this issue? So this, we could try to reduce emissions. Some could argue that that horse has already left the barn. So maybe work on resiliency, try to make the systems that we have in place resilient so that people are not affected as much by climate change. Or we can adapt, right? Adapt to the new normal of climate change, just like we are trying to adapt now to the new normal of COVID. And each one of those approaches is benefits and disadvantages. For us, we want to make sure that people can adapt in Zimbabwe to what they are doing. So before I go into what we are doing in Zimbabwe, I just wanted to show you the background against which we are working on these projects. Usually when we go to a lot of other places, we love to go to Central America and South America because it's closer to us, and the people in those systems have built capacities that can handle students and researchers coming from this part of the world, and they are in a better place, at least for us, to go and work with them. But one of the things that I've noticed over the years also is that a lot of the projects that we are working on, yes, it's something that I'm interested in. It's something that my students are also interested in. But usually it's the people who have money, whether it's a foreign donor who is based in the United States, or if we're in Ecuador, it's the Europeans, whether it's the Belgians or the Germans in the Galapagos Islands. There are very specific things that they want to study there, that they want to promote, and that's where they put the money. And so when the locals have a very specific thing that they're interested in, if no one is willing to put money in it, it's not going to happen. And we see this over and over, whether we're in Brazil, in Amazonia, or whether in the Pantanal, or whether in Ecuador, like I just mentioned, in the Galapagos, or in the Andes, or in Panama. We have a station where we work in Panama called the Batipa station. It's always someone dictating what they are interested in, and that's where you end up working on. So when we went to Zimbabwe, we wanted to try something different. We wanted to just go in and then maybe listen to what the people who are affected by all these changes in climate change, or people who are just, you don't have to argue, you don't have to debate the issue of climate change with folks in rural Zimbabwe, because they have seen that the crops that they grew up growing really every season after season, corn, soybean, groundnuts, some either potatoes or some other crop. Now they know that when they are sowing those seeds in the ground, there's no guarantee on the other side that they're going to get anything. They could pray, they could wish for the best, but it's not happening, and it's becoming, it's getting worse and worse this time. So we wanted to hear, what do they have? What is it that is a challenge to them? So if you are wondering, if you've been wondering up to now, where the hell is in Zimbabwe? Zimbabwe is in Southern Africa. So this is Africa. South Africa is right here. Zimbabwe is a tiny country. Well, it's tiny compared to other countries, but it's about 17 times the size of New Jersey. So it's really big, but its population is less than double that of New Jersey. When you think in terms of the United States, it's about 25 times smaller than the United States. And this population is about 20 times smaller. So in terms of density, Zimbabwe is a lot less densely populated than New Jersey, but it's a little, its density is a little higher than the population of the United States. Its density is higher than that of the United States, but just a little bit higher. And of course, when we go This is the capital, Harare, and our projects are based here. This is my rural home. So I have an advantage. I have a home field advantage in Zimbabwe. I speak the language. I grew up there. I understand the customs. I understand a lot of things that other people coming from abroad don't. So when we sat down with, we went with various stakeholders. We had a list of more than 20 different stakeholders that we engaged on this. And we wanted to identify what the main problems were, because all of us, or most of us on this broadcast, know that one of the biggest failures of aid in the past has been that people from abroad will define what they think is important for the people who are living in certain areas. It could be in Africa, it could be in South America, it could be in East Asia, wherever it is. And sometimes those interests don't coincide with what's interesting or what's important for the locals in that area. And what ends up happening is that the locals, if they feel like their voices are not being heard, what they do is they just accept the money, spend it on other things, and just move on with their lives. And the donor will walk away thinking, well, I was dealing with these idiots. They won't listen. They won't do what's good for them. And both sides will feel like, will not get any benefit from that interaction. So one of the things that we wanted to really change, and this really also coincides with donor fatigue, right? There are some organizations that have been pumping money into these areas, telling people, do this and your life will improve. And those people don't do it for one reason or another. Maybe because it doesn't work. Maybe they don't want to do those things. And so there are so many different iterations that you can go through when trying to understand why these projects just don't work. We didn't want to repeat that. So I went with my colleague here, Patrick Harsey, in political science, and all we did was just bring a tablet and take down notes. And we had some really interesting conversations with people. And the one thing that was clear everywhere we went was that drought and climate change, just increased temperatures and just unreliable, like just growing seasons that were not producing what people were used to getting was the constant theme everywhere we went. So one thing that we quickly learned early on was that it was going to be really difficult to work in Zimbabwe and come in and try to spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks. We have spent sometimes 8 weeks actually in Zimbabwe and not have a real base. So I told you I grew up in Zimbabwe, so we bought a piece of land. It's about 6.5 acres. We have another 3 acres somewhere else. What you see here is this house here. After discussing with stakeholders, be it teachers, be it village herds, be it politicians, we came up with a matrix of things that we think need to be done before we even get going. And some of it included capacity building. And so we all agreed that we needed something that would improve security, food security going forward, water supply, education, a lot of things that we ourselves were not able to provide, but we knew the people we're talking to felt like they had never had too many people come to them to actually just listen to hear what it is that they would want to get so that they to improve their lives. And they made it clear that they didn't want they just didn't want handouts. These are proud people who work really hard and want to be able to support themselves. So we established our base. So I got this land. I spent all my own money, and we built a house which is 5 bedrooms. And this is the house where that basement that I just showed you, the flooded basement, so in this corner here. It's in this corner here. And this only happened 2 weeks ago, by the way, the flooding. And then we have an office and enough room there for students and visitors to stay when they come in. And then, of course, one thing that, excuse me, one thing that we discovered very quickly, even when we were doing the listening tour, was that when we would make plans with people, to meet with people, sometimes there will be miscommunication, not because they were ignoring what we were telling them, but because their phones were not charged, the network was bad. Usually it came down to our phones, we didn't have any charge. And their kids, they would send their kids to the store, to the shops, where they would pay to get a cell phone charged or to get anything that they wanted to get power, and whether it's a tablet, whatever it is that they're using. But the one thing that really stood up, and for me, it's a personal thing, because my mom died from kidney failure, from complications from diabetes. This little thing here that you see here, this is a glucose meter. It may not be clear from the screen, but it's a glucose meter. Zimbabwe, just like many parts of the world, is just devastated by diabetes too. Type 2 diabetes is just it is taking a hold in a way that is just mind-boggling, really. And so a lot of the people they're struggling just every day to get power to charge these little things so they can test their blood sugar. So our first project, really, we had to find a way to help these guys find a way to charge their phones and charge these instruments. Luckily, in Zimbabwe, because of subsidies and because of things that come from international agreements, solar is much cheaper than many places. And you can get like a solar panel, it's really $1 a watt. You can get, so one of the things that we started off, we actually had 3 students work on an independent study that shows how to set up your solar panel to a charge controller, and then your inverter, and then how to control the whole system about DC and AC, and then just being able to scale it up. We had to set it up ourselves and show them how to scale it up in different scenarios. If you're thinking, well, this would be too expensive for rural people, it's not, because they're spending a lot more on oil, on candles, and then paying people in, like every day. They would take their people who are making a business out of this, that we charge cell phones, and they're paying like this whole setup here. They would pay for this setup 2 times over in a year, really. From the amount of money they are spending to charge their equipment. So, excuse me. So we decided that was the first project that we're going to work on, and we'll show them how it actually benefits them. And people then started adapting it for even small pumps that they would use in wells, reducing the amount of time it would take young girls to go and fetch water from faraway places. And then all these other kids who will be walking miles a day just to get a glucose meter charged. Now he suddenly had a lot of time on their hands. And because this is something that we also needed, remember this is in rural Zimbabwe, we also set up a big system for those who were interested to see how it would work on a much larger scale. And some of my students for water heating set up a system. These are all aluminum cans. And I know there are Stockton students on this broadcast, and they may remember us looking for aluminum cans. These are soda beer cans, and there are 320 of them in this. And it's a fascinating heating unit that can be used to heat spaces in the winter. So some of the students who I went with to Zimbabwe worked on this for solar thermal, but our focus was trying to get as many people as we could to start using photovoltaics. Because Zimbabwe, the nice thing about Zimbabwe, here in New Jersey, in the summer we get 12, if we're lucky, we get 10 or so hours of sunlight, decent solar radiation for solar panels. In Zimbabwe, it's like that all year round. And so you can, in this house, actually, this whole house, which is bigger than the house I'm talking to you from right now, is all just supported by solar and nothing else. We heat our water with this. And so some of the things that we also, we quickly discovered that although we wanted to demonstrate specific things when we went to Zimbabwe, right? We had the same donor syndrome or the expert syndrome. When we went, we just were like, we want them to grow mushrooms. We want them to do well. We want them to be foods. We want there to be food security. But it wasn't the most pressing issue. When we went there, there were some very specific issues that we know we could not reach people until we at least helped them with some of the things that were bothering them. The biggest issue was their kids. They felt like their kids, there was nothing happening in the schools, not because the teachers were bad, but there was nothing. There were no books. And if you look at the buildings, it was just really sad. And then the water issues in their neighborhoods, we had to help them find ways to find sources of water that are reliable. And then, of course, in rural Zimbabwe right now, alluvial gold panning is a big deal. In fact, 2/3 of adults who are making any living were involved in some way in alluvial gold panning. So before we even went to do any of the projects that were really of interest to us, we had to find a way to work with these locals to build their capacity to be in a place where an investor would be interested in coming in to work with them. So capacity building was a big deal, showing people how to set up a business, working with local government regulators to make sure that they recognize these as viable businesses, so improving worker safety, and then getting donors or investors to come in as partners in some of these areas. And of course, we are not experts in this area. So we managed to persuade a colleague who is at University of Florida, to work with the locals on doing this. And that project is flourishing on its own because of their graduate students who just got really interested in just getting these alluvial gold panners organized and into cooperatives, and then looking at the environmental impacts and educating people about the impacts of mercury. Because when you use mercury in amalgamating gold in these rivers, you end up with polluted waters. So because the school system that came up everywhere we went, whether it was teachers, politicians, and we are in luck. In the United States, a lot of the books that are used here are also in English. It's a different version of English than British English. So you won't believe this, but we spent a year, like a full year, just talking to the Minister of Education, which would be the Minister of Education, which would be the equivalent of the Secretary of Education here, trying to get them to accept that if we bring in American books that have American English, which spells color with C-O-L-O-R instead of C-O-L-O-U-R, it should be acceptable, right? Because it's the same language, really. But because of grading standards, and again, there are dozens of words that are different, even just flashlights and torches. Like in Zimbabwe, a flashlight is a torch. There's so many little things that you never think about until you get there and you start trying to negotiate between the two dialects of the same language, really. So after they accepted that, yeah, they could include these as acceptable, then we got the green light to start collecting books. And in the United States, when books editions are 3 to 5 years old, they are being thrown away already, or if they are 7, 8 years old. And we noticed that at some schools, they just dump them. So we worked with a lot of school districts to collect these books. And this is my colleague, Patrick Hasse, and we stored them on campus. Some of them we stored off campus because for this project, this is a high school student bringing books to us at the school, and this is a storage space on campus. We would collect books and ship between 30 and 50,000 books every few years. So we target about 3 to 4 years, and that's when our next shipment. Right now, we're actually getting close to 40,000. So we'll be raising money soon to get our next shipment. All these, this is actually happening during COVID. You see us, we have masks here. So this was early this year. And what we do with these books is Stockton students have been amazing, and the community in general has been amazing. They collect the books, phones, tablets, whatever. And when they are ready, this was 3 years ago, we shipped them in January. And then this is us bidding farewell to our book collection that we've been collecting for years. And then these are the books after they have gone through customs in South Africa and being taken to Zimbabwe and on their way to our site in Zimbabwe. We discovered this was our third shipment. So we've learned a few things along the way. We discovered that when you send books from here, sometimes they go through middlemen, and then you say, we are working with these 20 schools we're sending 40,000 books, so each school should get 2,000 books. They'll say, yes, we'll do that. And then you show up in Zimbabwe 6 months later to see those 2,000 books at each school. And sometimes you'll be lucky to see 200 books. So we decided there's to be a better way to do this. So I actually also went and built this shed where we would keep the books. And we would do the distribution ourselves. And the advantage of doing this, by the way, is that now we are experiencing exactly the same things that everyone is experiencing. In that house that I showed you earlier, where we would all live, but we have control over who gets the books, and we actually engaged lawyers to sign contracts with, if it's a principal, if it's the deputy principal, that we are giving you 1,000 books. And at any time during the next few years, we'll come back to see what's happening with the books. We just want to be able to say after 3 years that, yeah, 600 books are still in the library. Here's what happened to the other 300 books. And we can trace to see what is happening to them. Because we don't want, after engaging so many people to collect books, for someone to be laughing all the way to the bank over a weekend, really, after we have sent them those books. So the other thing that we really like about this location where we are is that we are only like 75 minutes from the airport, the international airport in Harare. And this road here, as long as you can get out of this is right at the house, you can get into a taxi from Zimbabwe, and it costs like $4 to get into the capital, Harare. So in about an hour, you'll be in the capital. And 20 minutes later, if you really wanted, you could be at the airport. So it makes it really easy. So we are right next to a big highway. And then we have a lot of land, and it's really easily accessible. But this is a chicken run. The birds had to be removed because, again, remember 2 weeks ago, those floods, again, see those photos again. This is our garden. These are mushroom sheds. These are all areas that, and again, the basement, fish pond that we're demonstrating. So we are being affected by the same. So they don't just get to tell us. These are photos that came through WhatsApp, through text like 2 weeks ago, saying, look at what's happening here. And these are some of the best moments in this project, because you can see there Stockton faces here. Yeah, Stockton faces, you see them. These are Stockton students who have gone with us, and we distribute to different schools. And there are synergies that come from this. When these kids come to the house and they see what we are doing, and they're not just collecting books, we show them what we're doing with the mushroom sheds, with the garden, with all sorts of activities. And their teachers who are also coming with them. And by the way, they sign out all these books. They're taking them with them. And we have done this, and we've distributed, at least in the last 6 years, close to 70,000 books this way. So when we engage their teachers, you'll see in the next few slides after these, how now we can go to those same schools and show them a number of different, and demonstrate a number of different projects for the school. Yes, I'm seeing the questions that you're asking about the floods and other issues. I will get to you in a second. I'll get to that, yeah. So the biggest thing that really drew me to go back and work in Zimbabwe was just reading about the headlines about food shortages in Zimbabwe. All these things that I never knew. I never experienced any of that growing up in Zimbabwe, and we were not rich because people have always managed to grow food and reap harvest. They were not making a lot of money. These were not cash crops, but it was enough for subsistence, and then sell a little bit of leftover to get money for tuition, for subsistence, and all these other things. So it really just affected me. It affected me a lot that people in rural Zimbabwe were not able to do this. So I actually spent in about 2014 or so, I spent a year on YouTube University trying to figure out, okay, what is the best way that we can grow sustainable foods that don't rely on external factors like temperature and precipitation. And I found that mushroom farming, which was just proliferating in Asia and other places, was one of the most viable projects that one could work on. The problem was I knew nothing about mushrooms. So I spent about 8 days as an apprentice on a farm in Ohio, learning how to grow different types of mushrooms. And those were the 8 of some of the most exciting days of my life, but also some of the hardest days of my life because of just what was involved in growing mushrooms. After I figured that out, I had to figure out a way, because when you look at some of the shades they use, like this shade that you're looking at on the in the photo, that's about 15 foot by 15 foot by 70 feet long. And if you wanted to do this using modern equipment and all these other things, it would cost you about 15 to 18,000 US dollars. And people we are working with don't have that kind of money. So we decided to find ways. So this is thatch. This is eucalyptus pores. And then the one is steel you find in the corners here. And so this 15 by 70 feet, you could build this with local materials, and you would have, you would spend about 700 US dollars, which many people can't afford. But remember, you can scale down. You don't have to scale. You don't have to use the same scale. So we worked with the farmers and we showed them ways to propagate and culture mushroom, whether they wanted to buy the inoculum or they wanted to culture it themselves. We worked with them, and I had 2 students work with me on this. Yeah, this is what you find inside those sheds. So each of those sheds could have 500 of these bags. They will be staggered. The advantage of doing this, by the way, also is that I don't have to go back to my dean every year begging for money, because if we are generating income there, which supports the people who live there, and then we can offset some of the costs of the students who also go and work on these projects in Zimbabwe. But we were producing mushrooms. These are, I'm blanking. These mushrooms, we grew button, but these are not button mushrooms. Oyster, these are pink oyster mushrooms and blue oyster mushrooms. And so the challenge that we had, so it's really difficult to teach other people to do things that you don't do yourself. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we were teaching them, we were also doing at our own site. So we would show them how we did it at our site, and then we would go to them with them to their own houses, and we would work with them so that they would build their own mushroom sheds. And we ran into a problem because a lot of the farmers didn't want everyone in the village to have a shed, because then we're not going to make money if everyone is doing mushrooms. And we tried really hard to make them understand that if all of us joined heads and then we became a cooperative, we would have a lot more power when we went to sell our product as one, rather than small individual farmers selling these as individuals. For some of them, it was a really tough concept to swallow. They just didn't want. They didn't want to share this knowledge with other people. But I think we managed to convince a lot of them, because they saw what we were doing and how, as a bigger cooperative, we were able to negotiate prices with even some of the local chains that would sell to local supermarkets who would carry this product. And then the last thing and the nice thing about mushrooms is you just need water and that shade. And that shade, because it's the climate there doesn't really change, it's perfect for growing mushrooms. And the last thing that we did was the garden project. And so again, behind the house, we went to work. And this is me and my partner here in Hamilton working on ways. We do this in our backyard, and we are trying to show how to do hydroponics where there's no moving water. All we are doing is, you can buy these from ShopRite or Walmart, and you use paper. You can even use paper or cotton, and you can grow lettuce. Within 7 weeks, you have lettuce growing hydroponically in water. There's no moving water here. All we are doing is this plumbing pipe. We use a drill press to cut these walls, and then, as you can see here, and then we leave one of them, or we don't leave it open. Well, what we do is every few days during the summer, you come back and you just pour your fertilizer in there, your water and fertilizer, and you can have it in any configuration you want. We got quite a few students interested in this, and you can have it in this format, or you can have it with styrofoam floating in a bed that also has no moving water whatsoever. And in 42 days, this is our lettuce. We had lettuce, we had kale, we had all sorts of veggies. And so once we perfect that method in a lab at Stockton, excuse me, sorry. Once we perfect that, then we take it to Zimbabwe, because we don't want to spend the whole summer trying something that won't work. We want to make sure that it works here in New Jersey before we go. And then with some of the students, we try the same situation. So it may not be the exact same configuration, but we use the same plumbing pipe. It's cheaper there, it's even cheaper there. And then instead of using, these are all like 2-liter gallons, either of water, containers of either water, orange juice, or other containers. And then, so the pipe is in the ground, and then we plant the veggies here. It could be anything that you want. That is a short growing season, so less than 3 months usually. And what we do is, if you are watering it, you just remove one of these at the end, and you add water from there. And this actually saves water. It uses up to 80% less water, and you can grow it in any conditions. And if you are able to, so what we're able to demonstrate with some people is, if you use wood on these, and you have your water in here, so we're using plastic. So it's like a basin that you created with plastic. You can move this around your house and follow the sun. So instead of having your lettuce after 7 weeks, you could have it a little earlier, actually. And so these are some of the projects. And as you can see, these are Stockton students that are working on these projects with local middle school and high school students. These kids, they get so excited about these projects. And then when we demonstrate them at our house for their parents, we got quite a few people interested in taking up these projects, or at least trying them at their houses. And then, unfortunately, we've been doing this for 3 years. We meant to go back last summer, of course. We all know what happened with COVID. And so I feel, I hope we're able to maintain this momentum. We won't be able to go this summer for sure. So after skipping 2 seasons, I'm hoping that we'll be able to maintain the momentum with mushrooms and the vegetables. But it's tough because they're being affected by COVID the same way we are, so they are immobilized. So I'm just going to answer a few of the questions that are on the chat, and then you guys can add more.
Okay, so I'm going to scroll back a little bit further. So Olivia, so they have to go to shops to gain electronic power as they don't have access at home. They were just wanting to clarify what you were talking about literally walking to take your devices.
Yes, so they are walking, and the shops are not close by. Sometimes they're walking an hour, and just to get. And remember, when you are charging your phone, they're not like the fast chargers we have here. Some of them, they would have to go and sit and wait an hour while that phone is being charged, and then they walk back.
Wow, that's a lot of time to do that too. And you're saying too that the cost of it's also.
Yeah, and that's why we thought we are not going to get anywhere unless we get this problem solved. Yeah.
Someone actually has a question about when you were mentioning about diabetes. Kath asked, I was interested in your comment that diabetes is such an issue there. Is there a lot of sugar in the diet? And you were talking about, bringing sustainability in crops and things. What is the food situation, and, what's more traditional there and, easy to access?
So, it's kind of weird because in Zimbabwe, diabetes is seen as a disease of affluence. You don't necessarily have to be rich, but it's often seen in people who, if you follow the diet, the normal staple, where they're eating a lot of corn and mixed veggies and sometimes meat, and they are doing a lot of work around the house. They are walking long distances. They're working in the field. They don't really, people who are like that generally don't get diabetes, right? It's when people get a job, like if you're a professional, you're a teacher, and you come back home after work and you can afford to buy soda, you can buy all sorts of these fancy foods. That's when people end up getting diabetes, because then they are buying all these other things, and then they're a little more sedentary. They are not. Our diet has always been high in carbs, but we've been offsetting it because we work a lot in the field and we walk a lot also. But because being a professional, sometimes you end up being a little more sedentary. It means that now you end up being prone to that. And also just the ease of transportation to go from place to place. When I would remember when I was a kid, when we would go to the rural area where that house is, we would walk. Whenever we want to go to my uncle's, we would walk forever just to get there. These days, you have a quarter, you can jump into a combi. We call them combis. And they're not quite like Uber, but it's more like Uber pools, really. Yeah.
Okay, so another question is what you had seen during your presentation. Tanjera says, does the program plan on trying to protect the building from floods like there were past few weeks in any way possible?
I really wish we were able to do that, because the problem is that we don't know anything about floods in Zimbabwe. Like, this is the first time that I've actually seen flooding in that area. And And the one thing that I failed to mention was that a lot of the places, like that house, is not insured. So although I spent easily upwards of $50,000 putting that house together, it's not insured. It's in a rural area. There's no, if I went to town to try to get an insurance policy on it, people will be they'll be wondering why what it is I'm trying to do. And this is the biggest problem, right? For me, at least I can say, well, if there's more, if there's whatever, I can go and rebuild. But what if I have spent my whole life investing to build that house? And this is what happens with people, a lot of Zimbabweans in the diaspora. They go to the UK and they spend 3 to 10 years working really hard, sending money home to build a house like that. And then they come back home and they think, well, I'm set now. At least I don't have to worry about a place to live. I can just worry about what to eat and all these other things. And then you get a flood that just destroys everything and you're pretty much done. Yeah, so unfortunately, it's not something that we grew up with, and it's not something that we plan for. Even I didn't plan for it, and I teach environmental science here. Yeah.
So someone also has another question following up about, the flooding. With no moving water, how does the water not get stagnant? Are there any issues like that you have to worry about, like water quality, that we do like here in New Jersey if something sits too long?
With no moving, what were they referring to? I'm sorry, I missed that part.
Yeah, Ali, can you give us a little bit more information in the chat, and then we'll come back. Amir has an interesting and fun question. How do you keep squirrels and other animals away from your crop in your backyard there?
Oh, here in in New Jersey, this is fun. With COVID, it's been interesting because we are both here. My wife and I are both here, and I was just telling my nephews the other day that the only way to love wildlife, these little critters, is if you don't have food that they love. We used to enjoy like watching blue jays in our backyard, cardinals, all these little birds. But these days, when we have our blueberries, our strawberries, all these are like, oh my God, those birds are back again. And with squirrels, you saw that with the plumbing pipe that we use, we raise it enough to where the squirrels won't reach. But with other plants, we are at their mercy, really. We are at their mercy. In fact, we had a whole thing of cauliflower just vanish overnight one time.
Yeah. I'm in central New Jersey, and we have deer, and they are very aggressive. And I've learned, what kinds of crops they are less likely to eat, how to, keep them away. So
yeah,
it's very much a thing.
And this summer, we actually trapped 2 bunnies and transported them somewhere else. And my wife was depressed about that for a month. And we agreed afterwards that we are not going to trap and move bunnies away anymore. So we are trying this next summer to try to find other ways to protect our backyard also.
So Ali wrote back, her question was about the hydroponics, the pipes with no moving water. Does it get stagnant? So how does the hydroponics work? Are there concerns that might be different in Zimbabwe than here, considering, climate's different? Are there any challenges in the hydroponics system?
So when we were doing research on this, everyone kept saying you cannot have it sit there for that long without getting all these other problems. But knowing just how fast these plants, especially lettuce, I know about lettuce and kale, just how fast they grow and how much water they are using. There's no issue with stagnation. The only problem that we had with stagnation, actually, and my wife can attest to this, is just mosquitoes. We were attracting mosquitoes left, center, and right. And it's an issue that we have to deal with this summer because I don't think it's sustainable. And especially where those pipes were. In fact, now we have a little greenhouse where we want to put everything because of mosquitoes. But in terms of stagnation, the water is used up. Within a week, we are replenishing it twice, really. And we didn't have any real issues. And I've talked to a lot of crop scientists who say, don't do this, it won't work. But we tried it. I just figured, what do I have to lose? Let me try it in the Arts and Science building. We tried it, it worked. And we tried it here in Hamilton, and it works.
Okay, so there's actually two questions regarding water. So I'll do the first one, which is Taylor said, you mentioned water being an issue there. How far do some people have to travel to get clean water?
So there are some, when you say people, usually it's just girls, really. And a lot of them will end up missing school because on the day that they're going to go get water, they may be walking an hour and a half each way just to get water. And it's not necessarily clean water also. That's the other problem. And so there are projects right now. In fact, when we were working on all these, I went to meet with one of the politicians at a hotel in Harare, and we were talking about it. And other people who were sitting close to us overheard us talking about this, and they were involved in international development, and they were interested they were trying to get a project going on water security. And we ended up working with them in our area, and it was just by sheer coincidence that they said, yeah, we would like to try out a few different things. And their project was really on just solar pumps, and they were also going against non-convention, where people want to sink these really deep wells with expensive pumps to get water to the top. But for them, they wanted shallow wells that they drill and then use small solar panels and smaller solar pumps that would just start working as soon as the sun is up, as soon as you get to a certain voltage, and they would pump water into a reservoir until it was ready. And then that water will be clean, and it will be in a closed reservoir that can be used all day. So those guys working on that project, hopefully this summer, and we'll see whether it improves the time. It makes life a little easier for the girls who have to walk long distances. But it's not unusual to walk 1.5 hours each way and then wait in line once you get to the well to get the water and then walk back.
So I think
sorry.
Go ahead.
I have photos of Stockton students holding those pails. They wanted to see if they could, and they would not walk more than 20 feet with those pails of water on their heads.
So I think you've answered, following up on what you were talking about. Kyle was asking about water pollution, clean water, and, water security, which you just mentioned. And hopefully that project that you just mentioned will be able to move forward.
Yeah, and it would be nice if, for example, right now, remember the mining issue. For me, the reason the alluvial gold panning, it was so important was that it pollutes, it releases both mercury and cyanide in surface waters. And sometimes when people are desperate, they would get river water close to their homes. And that's the worst type of water you can ever get, because although the mercury won't kill you immediately, it has significant neurological impacts on you. And if you, and it could affect, pretty much it would just affect the, just your especially for women, it could rob of your child's full potential, their whole life, really, because of its neurological impacts.
Okay, I think this is a perfect segue. You are doing a talk at a library right now with a bunch of other libraries. People, the only Ellie wants to know, are you still collecting books for the kids with the Zimbabwe Book Project?
Yes, we are always collecting our books, and you can find us at www.zimbabwebookproject.weebly.com. But my information is also posted on the with this talk, and you can email me. We'll be more than happy to come and collect those books from you. That's how we've been collecting so many books, because of people who hear about this project and they engage their families, and who engage their families. And it's been It's been amazing. Yes, thank you. Someone posted it. Zimbabwe project.
I can say this too. There's a lot of libraries who haven't been able to do book sales, or we have books that are not necessarily sellable. So if some other libraries might be listening, we might be able to help you and, help promote this project as well.
That would be great. Thank you.
I'm trying to see. So Diana's also having mercury poisoning and water issues, according to CAF. This is not a new thing. This is an issue that comes in many different communities. So I think, Brooke was asking, do you accept textbooks as well? Do you have a list of what you do and do not accept on that website?
Yes, and it shows you the only two types of books we don't accept is religious books, because politicians think they don't want us to come and start spreading a new religion, and any political books, because they don't want us to, they think we are up to changing the regime. So they don't want regime change or converting people to a religion they don't want. So those are the two types of books we will not accept. The other books we will not accept are books in languages other than English. So.
Okay, I think that is, or let's see. Someone had a suggestion, different suggestions about different types of growing mediums, and you can totally look at those later, Tait, and we can.
Formations, okay.
Yeah, the formations. Kath said it was a straw bale, thatch bale gardening. I don't know.
Okay.
But
yeah.
So. Okay, if there aren't any last questions, I want to tell people about the next program, which actually it is one of Tait's colleagues. And the next lecture, which is the final one in the series, is Thursday, March 11th at 7 p.m. And it's with Dr. Maritza Jauregui. And it's about disparate environmental impacts, causes, and solutions to environmental injustice, and specifically environmental justice in New Jersey. This is a topic, this is why we're talking about these kinds of things with the American Library Association's Resilient Communities, Libraries Respond to Climate Change, which funded this program. So you'd definitely be interested. Tait actually recommended her. So I think it's going to be a great program. If you want to reserve your tickets, you can go to ebpl.org/opsandgreen. So thank you all for coming. Tait, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and sharing about this project. Hopefully the Zimbabwe Book Project will get some new donations and we'll be able to help support that as well. And maybe some interest too about all the sustainability projects, since we have so many great resources in our community that people might be inspired to, give advice, feedback, and, maybe even invest.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. You can check out the website, as I said, ebpl.org/option-green. And I actually want to thank our community partners, the Friends of the East Brunswick Environmental Commission. We've been doing the Option Green series with them for 3 or 4 years now. And the other libraries are the Highland Park Public Library, Matawan Aberdeen Public Library, New Brunswick Free Public Library, North Brunswick Public Library. You can see the Brunswick theme here with me, right? Old Bridge Public Library, Plainsboro Public Library, who's actually in the chat. Thank you guys for coming. And the South Brunswick Public Library. So again, thank you so much for coming. Be safe and be well. Bye. Thank you for joining us for this week's Encore presentation. To join us for live programs or to learn more about the East Brunswick Public Library, visit our website at ebpl.org.